everyone. Welcome back to Keto and Crime. I hope you all had a great weekend. As you recall, there was no court on Friday, the 17th. So we are picking up today, Tuesday, May 21st, with what happened yesterday, a Monday, May 20th, in the Chad Daybell case. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Tracy. I do true crime, horror movie reviews, and dark history. I also do a holiday tree. I don't have it directly in view right now because it's still stuck on 𝗙𝗂𝗀𝗃. That will be changing to fit all the summer patriotic holidays very soon. But welcome, and I hope I earn your subscription. I do breakdowns of court cases that I've been keeping up with. I've got almost 200 videos on the Chad Daybell-𝗂𝗂 case, including the day-by-day coverage of the 𝗂𝗂 trial here on my channel. So check that out. And with that being said, let's dive into what happened yesterday, May 20th. As you recall, the prosecution did rest on Thursday. So we are now entering Daybell's actual defense. When court first takes up, there is a brief discussion with the judge before the jury is brought in, saying that remember Pryor tried to get pretty much all the charges dismissed, specifically on JJ's, because there was a typographical error that had his death around the 8th or 9th, which we know was Ty Lee's time of death, instead of the 23rd to the 24th. So what Boyce is telling the gallery is that he will cover that when he gives his final instructions to the jury before they go in to deliberate. And they will be noted to use the original dates of the 23rd and the 24th when considering JJ's charges. So that is how that will be handled. Then the jury is brought in, and Pryor calls his first witness, which is 𝗚𝗂 Daybell Murray, Chad Daybell's daughter. As you recall, her and her husband Joseph lived catty corner to Tammy and Chad before Tammy's death. And since Tammy's death and Chad's incarceration, she has been living in her parents' old house, which is now owned, as far as we know, by John Pryor, who has been deeded it to pay for the legal expenses. Now, they do eventually come right out and say that there is financial arrangements with John Pryor to allow her and Joseph to live there, so there's no conflict of interest. But anyway, she's sworn in. They go over her living arrangements, and then Pryor begins with asking her very candidly to describe her mother's health. 𝗚𝗂 says that her mother's health was rapidly declining during her last year of life, and oftentimes she would go to bed between 5 and 7 o'clock in the evening because she was so exhausted. I'm the same age now as Tammy was then. After working a full day at 2 day jobs and doing this, there's oftentimes I fall asleep by 7 o'clock, and I'm pretty sure my health is not going downhill. I have a clean bill of health, and I think Tammy did too. The more I hear from 𝗚𝗂, the less I like her. But anyway, they go over how 𝗚𝗂 had sleep apnea, Tammy had anemia, and anxiety, and she took an herbal supplement and a generic form of Prozac. She says she also took colloidal silver to help with the fact she would bruise very easily. I mean, Tammy did have a huge collection of herbal remedies. And then Pryor asked specifically about the day before Tammy died, October 18th, 2009. And she said that her mom was preparing for the Scholastic Book Fair. She was generally friendly, like she always was, but she was struggling with moving all the boxes and was extremely exhausted by the end of the day. He did ask about why many of her co-workers and the principal of Central Elementary said that she never missed a day of work, and she said because she was paid by the hour, it was very important to their financial future for her to be at work, so she never took a day off, even if she was sick. Then they go over the fact that she was the primary driver of the Dodge Dakota, and that actually, correct that. She says her dad was the primary driver of the Dakota, and that Tammy drove the Equinox, which will come into conflict with something her brother says a little bit later. She said that the Dodge Dakota was then sold to 𝗚𝗂 and her husband, and they still drive it. Her Pryor then asks about Tammy's Fitbit, and she says that they all had them. She even bought one for Chad, but Chad wouldn't wear it, and there was some family contest about who could get the most steps, and she said that often the amount of activity shown on the Fitbit wasn't accurate because Tammy didn't like to lose. She was very competitive, and she would often swing her arms to get the steps. Now, I tell you, on my Fitbit, I do all my steps. I walk almost 20,000 steps every single day, and there is some times when I can't get up and walk that I do sit here and shadow box to get my 250 steps for that hour in, and to get some cardio going. Even if you're just doing this, it's getting up your heart rate. This is exercise. Your heart rate actually gets higher doing this than it does walking at a leisurely pace. So this is work. I don't care if Tammy was doing this to get steps. That's still exercise. And I don't believe that Tammy's health was going downhill the way it's being described here. She's talking about her mother like she was just on death's door all the time. Then Pryor asks about Tammy training for a 5K race. She said that she was training for a race, that she herself was training for a race and had invited her mom to run, but Tammy wouldn't do it. But Tammy was volunteering at the race and did help plan it. And then he asks about the Zumba fitness classes and the clogging and the high intensity interval training. And she says that both her and her mom were overweight and wanted to exercise more. So they started going with some ladies at school. They started going in April of 2019. She said that in each of those classes, you're allowed to participate to your ability, and you didn't have to go up to the ultimate high velocity, and that often Tammy would stay in the back of the room and dial it down. But this is exactly contrary to what everyone else that was in that class said about Tammy. She said pretty much the same thing about the clogging, that Tammy went at a much more leisurely pace than everyone else. And then they ask about her changing her life insurance, and she said pretty much her mother took out the maximum amount of insurance she could afford, because as you get up further, she couldn't afford it. So that was something they had already discussed. And then Pryor asked about Chad and Tammy and the book publishing company. She said pretty much that Tammy did everything but write the books and find the authors. Then Pryor asks about the house that Tammy died in. They talk about how it's essentially one story, but there is the little cozy cone that's technically upstairs, and that all the children would often use that to study, or just when they needed some solace, they would all go there. And then he asks about her father's doctrine, and she says it's pretty much a fundamentalist view of Mormonism, and it's pretty much how they worshipped 100 years ago, and that light and dark was part of it. If you're light, you're acting like Jesus. If you're dark, you're acting like Satan. And that that Tammy was actually more fanatical about it than Chad. Emma, I hope you get right with God, because you are absolutely lying on your mother right now. There is no way, I believe, that Tammy went around assigning numbers to people, which Emma actually says that Tammy did, assigning numbers to people about whether they were light or dark. There is in no world that you can convince me that Tammy Daybell did that. You are lying to protect your father. And then they talk about blessings and castings, and that Emma says that, yes, this is a part of normal LDS doctrine, and that it is to have your own body back so you can take control of yourself. And Pryor asks that has the word zombie ever been attested to it, and she says she's only heard the word zombie in TV and movies. And then basically more about how she said that, her mother supported her father's writing career, and that how her dad is very introverted and kind of a bookworm, and that he was, less energetic than Tammy. And then they talk about the events of October 9th. Tammy dropped Emma off from their clogging class and then immediately went home. She was driving the Dodge Dakota. And then that after the incident, she did say paintball gun. And then Pryor asked about the trip to California over Thanksgiving break. This was, and then the trip to Knott's Berry Farm. And basically she said that the family went minus Tammy. Lori Vallow was also there, but she didn't know that much about Lori. And then there's a short break. They come back in, and then they continue talking about her knowledge of Lori. And she said that Lori never really mentioned the children until they came up missing. And then she just said that they were in a safe place, and her father never really said anything about the children. And they talk about the rushness of Tammy's funeral and how the funeral home gave them the choice of either the following Tuesday or the following Saturday, and they chose the following Tuesday because they didn't want to drag it out that long, even though everyone else connected with Chad has said that he was pushing for her to be buried as quickly as possible. But now they're saying that the funeral home is the one that gave them those two options only. Then Emma said that pretty much Tammy was responsible for the pet cemetery and all the things buried there: ducks, rabbits, chickens, raccoons. There were a lot of raccoons buried, but they were normally buried up closer to the silver shed. There was also a lot of stray cats because they would get hit on the road, and that Tammy was often the one in charge of the pet cemetery. They said they never owned a dog because Chad doesn't like dogs. Why does that not surprise me? And then basically they talk about the day Tammy was exhumed. She said she didn't really know about it until it was pretty much already happening. And then they talk about how many law enforcement she's talked to and how often Chad attended church. And then they talk about Chad's attempted getaway the day that the bodies were found and how he was driving above the speed limit. And she said she never saw him go above 50, but then the officers went after him and brought him back in handcuffs. So Pryor is done. Blake cross-examines. Lindsay Blake basically tells her, now you've promised to tell the truth here, and that still stands. And then she asked Emma about the 5K race, and she said that, again, Tammy was not participating. She was, but Tammy was only helping to plan it and being a volunteer. And then she brings up Tammy's medical records and says, would it surprise you to know that there was absolutely no mention of sleep apnea or anemia in any of your mother's medical records? Emma says, no, that doesn't surprise her. And then they talk about the Fitbit and the activity levels and how they were consistent with a very active person. And Emma says all that she knows is that Tammy was very sick and coughing the night of the 18th. And then Blake says, well, was it fair to say that your mother enjoyed physical activities? Emma says yes, but she also enjoyed video games and Pokemon a lot more. And then again, Emma presses that her mother was not training for a race, although everyone else says that she was. And then they talk about the insurance form and how that's pretty standard. She took the maximum amount that she could afford. And then she talks more about the exhumation of Tammy's body and the findings of that, which shows asphyxiation, and then about some of Emma's comments to Detective 𝗙𝗂𝗄. And then this right here was like one of the chef's kiss. Basically, Blake asked Emma if her dad ever told her where J.J. Vallow was. And she says she asked him once. He said, yes, he is safe. And the same question for Tylee. He was safe. And then Blake asked her, but where were they found? Where were they safe? Where were they found? And Emma kind of like drops her head a little bit, in the backyard in my dad's property. Boom, mic drop, Lindsay Blake. And then they talk about how she never met Alex Cox, didn't know anything about Alex Cox until all of this hit. They talk about Chad's books and that that she, as far as she knows, Chad's affair with Lori was not physical until after her mom died. Oh, Emma. And then she said that she also did not want her mom to have an autopsy because she felt it was natural causes, but then the court ordered it and it had to be done, and that they weren't told until the last minute. They seem very hurt that they exhumed their mother. And then they talk about some of her other conversations with Chad, as well as the $9,000 that was in Mark's dresser that she was told about when they took her dad to jail, and how she was instructed to continue putting $30 a week on Lori's prison commissary or jail commissary. And then how Chad told her that he's probably not coming back. Yeah, that's an understatement. And then how he told Emma to move out of her house and into his, and it's essentially your house, but I will make arrangements with John Pryor to make sure you can live there. They still live there. And that basically, does she understand why her dad was arrested? And Emma says yes. And then again, Blake asks her whose bodies were found in your dad's backyard, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. Blake has nothing further. Pryor begins to redirect. He asks more about the insurance and then wants to hammer home that they knew nothing about the exhumation until it was done. And then she is released from the stand, but they keep her under subpoena because I have a feeling little Miss Emma will be back. And then the next witness is Garth Daybell. Remember, he is the son that was living with Chad and Tammy at the time. He is a teacher at in the Sugar City school system. Pryor begins asking about the Dodge Dakota. That he said that when they first bought the truck in 2017, yes, his father was the primary driver, but then his mother became the primary driver after the fact. So that directly contradicts what his sister just said. So, and then they talk more about the pet cemetery, how there were a lot of raccoons buried there. And then there's a break for lunch. After they come back, Pryor continues his direct examination. And then they talk about how he's a 8th grade science teacher at Madison Junior High. They talk about the time that the children, not the children, but how the detectives came and questioned him at school. And then they talk about September 9th, 2019, when he pulled up and his father was wearing his yard clothes, and he told him that he shot and killed a raccoon and put it in the pet cemetery. And then they talk about Tammy's health. He said that yes, his mother's health was going downhill. She was tired a lot. She did easily bruise. She did go to the doctor for one of the bruises. She had a hard time lifting heavy things. He talks about the paintball incident, and they kept hammering it home. It was a paintball gun. It was a paintball gun. It was a paintball gun. And then they ask about the evening of October 18th. Garth was working at a haunted house and about 30 minutes away. He said he spoke to his mother after right before he left, and she said she doesn't feel good. I don't want to cook. Can you get some McDonald's for us? And how Garth drove to Rexburg and picked up a quarter-pounder with cheese meal for Tammy, and Pryor made a point of saying, oh, a very healthy meal, and Garth just responds, it depends. He kind of shrugged his shoulders and looked down. He said he left around 7 p.m. His mother told him to have a good time. She'll see him tomorrow. And then when he got home around 1 a.m., he passed the bedroom. He said he heard his father snoring, and then he went into his bedroom and watched YouTube until around 3 a.m. And then he was awakened a few hours after that by Chad saying, Garth, get up. I need your help. He goes in, and that's where they found his mother's body. She was on the floor. They talk about picking her up and putting her back on the bed. And then they talk about how the funeral director only gave him 2 available slots, the following Tuesday or the following Saturday. And then they again talk about Knott's Berry Farm, who all was there, the day that, again, the police came to question him at the school. And then how when Tammy was exhumed, how they weren't told until right at the last minute. And then they talk about the doctrine and says that his faith is a lot different than his father's and his parents, and that his father is very old traditionalist. It's a lot like the Mormon faith was 100 years ago. He says he believes in the light versus good, the good versus evil part of it, but not to the degree that his parents did. He does know what a casting is. Pryor has no further questions. Lindsay Blake will now cross-examine him. She does reaffirm that Tammy was the primary driver of the Dodge Dakota. They talk about the raccoon incident on September 9th. Blake asks whether Tammy was getting winded as far back as September, and that did Garth ever share those concerns with the police or the coroner. He says he doesn't recall. And then they talk about the results of the autopsy, how she was obviously pretty healthy along with everything else. And then she again asks him about what happened the night Tammy died. He did add in something different that wasn't there when he was talking to Pryor. He just says that he fell asleep watching YouTube, and then his father was waking him up to come help him. In this rendition to Lindsay Blake, he says that he heard a thump, then his father was there, then they put her back on the floor. So no comment, but you know where I'm going with this. And then again, they talk about all the time he was questioned by law enforcement, what he said, and then basically, had he ever heard about JJ or Tylee being possessed? He said he never heard that. He said he had not heard that his mom was possessed. And then Blake asks again the mic drop question, is your mom still alive? No. Kind of cruel, but it gets the point home. Blake has nothing further. Pryor will redirect. He says he asked Garth if he felt any of the law enforcement was threatening or intimidating him for his testimony. He said that in some cases he felt that way. Pryor rests. Blake asked for a brief recross, and she asked Garth if he changed his testimony between the first and second grand jury. He says he did not. Nothing further from Blake. And then there's a short sidebar. This takes about 15 minutes. Garth is released from his subpoena, and Pryor calls Horace Fisher, who is Garth's attorney. He basically asks him in under what capacity he works for Garth. He said Garth did retain his services when he was being questioned by law enforcement and in conjunction with the first and second grand juries. And basically, Pryor has nothing further. Blake then asks if it was the lawyer's understanding that there were no charges against Garth. The Fisher agrees. Blake is done, and so Forstner is released in a very brief testimony. The next witness called is Joseph Murray, Emma's husband, and Pryor begins by talking about their family life. They've been married for 7 years. They have 3 children. He asks how many times he and Joseph have spoke before this testimony. He says they've spoke once or twice over the phone for about 5 minutes. Pryor asks about October 9th and what Joseph was doing that day. He says he was chopping wood for their fireplace. He got a notification that Tammy posted in a Facebook group about the attempted shooting. Of course, they went over there, and he says that she was talking about a paintball gun the entire time, not a actual rifle, and that the police are the ones that said it was an actual rifle. Yes, only after they had tons of evidence that it was an actual rifle. And then they ask about the Dodge Dakota. He said he bought it from Chad in December of 2019. Pryor asked Joseph if he observed Chad's regular travel patterns. He says that he would see him leave and come back on a daily basis. And then, of course, he asks who was the primary driver of the Dodge Dakota. Joseph says that Tammy was, again, directly contradicting what his wife Emma said. Pryor then asked about the book fair on October 18th. He said that Tammy was driving the Dodge Dakota that day, that Joseph said there was a major issue with some potatoes freezing, so he was help with his friend who was a farmer, helping him get the potato crop in. and so he wasn't there for the entire part of the day. But he did ask to use the truck. Tammy said Joseph could use the truck, and that Emma would take Tammy home. So he said when he went over to get the keys from Tammy, she seemed very tired. She was sitting on the couch. Chad was at the computer, and she was coughing and exasperated. And then that evening when she brought the keys back, Tammy was still sitting on the couch and seemed very tired and was still coughing. He said it just appeared to him she didn't feel that well. He didn't say much about her health going downhill, probably because he didn't observe her that much. They talk about the pet cemetery, how many raccoons had been shot there. They're again trying to prove that raccoon text was nothing out of the ordinary. And then he asked about JJ and 𝗙𝗪. He said he never really heard the names until after all of the stuff. They talk about his first conversation with Detective 𝗙𝗪ć𝗂 and how many times Detective 𝗙𝗪ć𝗂 had been to the property, and that how because of law enforcement that he and his entire family began getting nasty looks from people in the area and at church, and that again about the Fitbit competition, that how Tammy was very competitive and she would again just shake her arm to get more steps. She wasn't really being as active as it showed. And then she said that Tammy was very jealous of his father for losing weight. And then Pryor has nothing further. This is where they dismiss for the day. So when court takes back up today, May 21st, we will be looking at the cross-examination of Joseph Murray. And I'll be back with that on Wednesday, the 22nd. And until next time.